Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
There's no question that the pandemic has been hard on children. Whether or not their schools have reopened, a flood of research in recent months has found alarming spikes in depression and anxiety among children and their parents. Multiple studies have found that students, especially those with disabilities and from low-income families, are learning less than they should. But a new study from NBC News and Challenge Success is one of the first to shed light on the differences between students whose classes have been exclusively online and those who have been able to attend in person at least one day per week. That is from an NBC News article entitled, "Remote Students Are More Stressed Than Their Peers in the Classroom," according to a recent study. We're going to break that down today, but then in the back half of the show, we're also going to talk about, is homeschooling the right option? And you might confuse remote learning and homeschooling to be the same thing. But as the other article that we get to reference today points out, the advocates of homeschooling say that they are distinctly different. Of course, if we're having a conversation on education and the state of students in America, we couldn't begin that discussion without
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, I'm really interested in this one today because having worked with students for an awful long time, basically my entire adult life, and now this year getting to work in a virtual academy setting with some of our local students, I feel like I've learned even more, which I like. That's what it's all about, is waking up and trying to learn something new. So we're going to use the word illuminate, ILLUMINATE. It is a transitive verb, and we're going to use the second definition to make clear, explain, elucidate, to inform, instruct, or enlighten. So that's what we're going to try to do today when we talk about the state of mental health with young people today and how their schooling and other activities may be affecting this. So 2 good articles, 2 different topics. And as Justin pointed out, sometimes those topics are blended and people use them interchangeably. So we will try to illuminate or elucidate the differences between homeschooling and virtual learning.
So we've got basically 3 main areas of this survey to cover. And the first one, is disengaged. It's the percent of students who say they are purposefully or fully engaged in school. So in the fall of 2019, 44.5% of students said that they were purposefully or fully engaged in school. So just under half of students were fully engaged in school. In the fall of 2020, we saw a 9 percentage point drop down to 35.7%. Okay. So it was at 44.5, down to 35.7. And the interesting thing here, Lance, is there's a number of things you can attribute to this, right? I mean, for one, we know that video style communications just don't produce, generally speaking, the same level of engagement that anybody, set aside just students, right, that any human is used to. There are things that we don't necessarily get in videos, and there's also things that create those jarring effects, like if the video is delayed, then you don't react in real time, or if the video quality is not good, maybe you're not seeing everything. Or maybe, depending on how schools are doing it, maybe students are getting very limited or almost no, visual with their teachers on a regular basis. So there could be a lot of different reasons that's happening, but perhaps the simplest one, at least that comes to my mind, is they're not seeing their friends as much, right? So why do you engage in school? Well, you might say it's because the topic needs to be interesting or because the teacher does a good job. And not to say that those things aren't true, but it helps if you have something to look forward to in the school day, like seeing your friends or going to lunch or recess or whatever it might be, or a class that you have with a friend that you like. And they're not necessarily getting that in the same way.
Well, I think you said it when you gave the statistic there, right? In 2019, when things were supposedly better, only 44% of students were fully engaged in their education. So that means there's 56% there that's unspoken for. Why are they at school? And I think you touched on it and drove it home when you said it's social. It's the social aspect that happens with schooling, in that you get to go to school and interact with other people, with adults other than your parents. And I think that is the key here that we're seeing, as well as you said, because when you talk about the video part of it, I know a lot of young people, even some of the interns that we have on this show, who are a little bit older. I mean, they're college age, but they're totally enamored with their video. They go down the rabbit hole on TikTok and YouTube, and they have no problem becoming totally engaged in the screen of the device that they're looking at. So I'm not so sure. That's where I kind of question if it's the screen, but I think it's that social interaction that's missing when you talk about online learning, that or virtual academies or virtual school, that the majority of students, they're not getting to supplement that during the pandemic.
The end statistic, and you kind of hinted at it, but the reason, right, or what's contributing to this, because we talked about being disengaged, but what about being stressed out? Because that's the thing where we talk about anxiety, increase in suicide rates. Those sorts of things are the result generally of stress and an increase in it. So how students say their stress levels have changed since before the pandemic. 56% of students say that it's increased. Okay, so there's over half of students, right? A majority of students say that their stress has gone up since before the pandemic. 30% say that it's stayed the same, and 13%, I guess that requires some analysis, why they feel it's decreased. Maybe it's because for that 13%, not being at school is better. We do know that obviously there are people that prefer an online learning environment where the social interaction of the classroom is not required. So that's probably part of what you're seeing there in the decreased percentage. The increased percentage, though, and I guess this is kind of I don't want to seem insensitive, Lance, because I do think that, we need to be conscious of the fact that we're doing something with school that in the history of our public education system, we've really not, and part of the reason it's been so haphazard is because we've really not tried to do this before, shift to this environment, and in some cases hybrid style where we're in between, right? It's not all in person, it's not all online, it's something in between, and whether or not that's actually worse. But I guess the point that I was getting to is I would kind of be surprised if half of students hadn't said that their stress had increased, because I think most people's stress has increased as a result of the pandemic, right? I mean, there's just, I was listening to a speaker at Rotary Club just the other day, and they're a healthcare professional, and she was making the point, she said, when you have to put your mask on and cover your face, it makes you more stressed. It's just how it is. When you have to communicate to somebody that way, it puts you more on edge, in part because you can't fully see them, and it's just a small way. For some people, it's a big deal. For other people, it's not as big a deal. The reality is it impacts all of us. And that's just one example, right? That's to say nothing of, for example, a lot of people not being able to walk into the grocery store like they used to, and having to shift to, well, now I have to think ahead, and I have to place the order online, and I have to find a pickup time, and I don't know if they're going to have what I have, and I don't know if I'm going to get it on sale, and on and on and on, right? Lots of little things that we might say individually, that's not a big deal. They add up, and you might not be consciously aware of them, but they're having an impact. And I think the same can be said of students, right? I mean, they're people too. It's not like they're not human. So I guess the point here is, yeah, we need to be aware of it from my perspective, but it would be kind of weird if we weren't seeing this, I guess is my thought.
Well, exactly, because for many of us, and I am one of them, any type of change in our routine adds stress. I mean, I'm anxious when I go to the doctor. Why? Because I don't usually go to the doctor. So even when I'm going for what's going to be good news or what I think is going to be good news. My blood pressure goes up in the doctor's office versus what it does at home, because that's just the way we are. We're wired as humans, and we've seen immense change for many of us in the last 12 months with the pandemic. So I think you're right that this is a real thing. I mean, it has gone up. You know, nobody's going to doubt that the anxiety level of the American public, which includes students and young people, have gone up. Part of what we're talking about today is what's the root cause? Is it online school or virtual schooling? Or is it other items? And your 13% analogy, I think, is exactly correct. There are many young people, 13%, I would have said probably closer to 1 in 4, 25% of young people who are anxious about going to school. They either A, don't perform well there, or they're being bullied. And, you know, that's why we've seen a growth in homeschooling and online schooling. Is that there is a niche within the student population that prefers not to be involved with others as much as you are. I mean, school is a really social environment, and some of us don't like all that social. We like some social interaction, but we don't like all of that. I mean, I was talking to my wife earlier this morning, and I said, you know, had there been virtual school when I was in school, I might have chosen it because I got frustrated at school because it was like, okay, I got this. You know, why are we doing it for the 4th time? Why are we doing all these, quote, fun, stupid things? And I know now as a teacher, you do them to engage, as you pointed out, those students who aren't really engaged in their education. I was engaged in my education. I was a quick learner. And so for me, I got bored at school and got in trouble because I was being a smart aleck and using my intelligence to cause problems. So had there been an option to do something where I didn't have to be in that situation, where I could just learn on my own and then go play my sports or be involved in the Boy Scouts or whatever organization or youth group that I wanted to be, and gotten my social interaction in areas where I was wanting social interaction, I might have been better off. But to your point, the story's not that the anxiety is there. As you said, that should have been expected. That should have been acknowledged and say, okay, what are we going to do to deal with it? Instead of just making it out there that, why is this new to everybody? If adults are anxious because of the pandemic, it makes sense that young people would be as well.
Coming up, the top challenges that remote students report facing while completing schoolwork. In other words, what is at the root of this? Why are they experiencing more stress? Why do they feel more disengaged? Lance and I have provided some supposition, but let's talk about what the students are telling us. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
A new study from NBC News and Challenge Success is one of the first to shed light on the differences between students whose classes have been exclusively online and those who have been able to attend school in person. It's been a concern since the beginning of the pandemic. Lance and I have broken down that students feel more disengaged and more stressed as a result of those students being outside of school versus those students physically present at school. But why is that? What are the top challenges that students are reporting? In other words, you're saying, you know, what is making it difficult for you to be away from the school building? What's causing you issues? Nearly 64% of students say that internet connection and technical issues are the top challenge that they face as a result of being away from school. Internet connection makes up about 50%, technical issues 13%. Then following that, distractions are 12.6%. So the interesting thing here, okay, and the last one is do not understand directions, 12.1%, is that the top 3 issues, right, are things that are related to being in an environment where you need technology and you need space to effectively do what you're being asked to do. And the third thing is, the way in which teachers are able to relay instructions is generally different than how they might relay it in the classroom. So I guess the thing that I take away from this, Lance, is all four things, the four main things, and there's other stuff, but these are the four top things that have a notable statistical measure, all four of those things are logistical based issues, right? I mean, they all center around not being able to create the correct environment to be conducive to the learning, whether that's my internet's not working, right? So I've decided to go do something and now I can't do it. And that's the same internet and technical difficulties. I guess I kind of combine them to say that that's 64% because I think they're heavily related. Well, my computer's not working, so the internet's working, but I can't use the internet, or my computer's working, but the internet's not working. So, whatever it is, something related to how I'm supposed to be connecting is preventing me from doing it, which is naturally stressful to anybody. I mean, I've seen how angry I can get at technology, right? When it's not working the way that you need it to, especially if you have something important that you want to get done and it's not cooperating. So it makes sense that those would be the top issues, especially since we covered how difficult internet connections can be in rural America and even in inner cities. Reliable internet, not just internet access, reliable internet can be a big obstacle. I mean, that's something that you and I went through, Lance, right? When you went remote and have been recording from home, we had to fight that.
Exactly. And I think that's a great point, that those are items, 3 out of 4 students, their anxiety went up because of things that we could fix as a country. And you and I have kind of talked about this, going back to the Great Depression. I'll bring in a little history here, that the Rural Electrification Agency that FDR created, one of his alphabet programs, rural America wasn't electrified when the Great Depression started, and people needed jobs. So FDR and the government put aside a big pot of money to build electric lines going out to rural America. So when we're in the midst of talking about, a $1.9 trillion stimulus package, where's money available to create some infrastructure to bring broadband internet to desolate areas, be it in the inner city or in rural America? I mean, again, the pandemic has exposed a problem. We need people back to work. We need to improve broadband internet access for all Americans. And why aren't we talking about that to solve the problem? And if that is true and we can solve that, then what you've just done is taken out 75% of student concerns that cause anxiety for remote learning. As well as what would it do economically when you talk about ordering things online, be it your groceries or through Amazon or Walmart or Target or wherever you get that and get home delivery. If you don't have good internet service, then you have to go out in public, which then creates even more stress because am I going to, get sick because I have to go out in public because I don't have good internet service to order what I need to order and have it delivered to my home. I mean, it's like, okay, we're talking about all of these things on the surface. And if we get down to the root cause of it, the root cause is we have to improve broadband internet service. So why isn't the government attacking the root cause? Why are we just going to send money to state and local governments and to individual people and to people in areas where of the economy that have been hit the hardest, which is not necessarily a bad idea. But wait a minute, we know the root cause of the problem is this, and don't have any bills before Congress to take care of that.
A lot of public schools were making this transition last spring, right? Rather haphazardly. It's like, oh, we got to do something. They kind of were, we're just going to do what we do in person online. And I think that they've almost all learned that's not really how it works. You really can't do that effectively. And I think that's the problem that's highlighted by this, is to say that, look, for some students, this is a good thing. For a lot of students, it's not the environment they're used to. It's maybe not the environment that's the best for them to succeed in. And when you add technical challenges on top of these changes, it's just not realistic to think that we're going to provide, that students are going to learn as much. If you're forcing them into a change, and then the change you force them into, they may not like inherently anyway, but then it's more difficult for them to do it because of technical related issues. I mean, what do you expect? You know, I mean, what would happen if you put an adult in that situation, right? Well, we're going to change this, and the thing we're going to change to doesn't work the way that it used to, and the way that we say it's supposed to work, you have problems with regular technical issues with, you know, that would be upsetting to any person, I think, and it would be frustrating, and you would probably be in the workplace, you'd probably be less productive, which in school would generally translate to learning less. But what we're talking about coming up, because we've kind of talked about remote learning, right? Remote school. Is it the same as homeschool? How is homeschooling different? Because I'm sure, Lance, lots of parents have considered, you know, we've thought about homeschool before. Now there's a pandemic. Maybe this is the time to start homeschooling. Maybe that's what's best for our student. And we have an educator on the show, so we're going to get his thoughts and talk about how many students use this right now, and how is it different, and can it really be a good option for students? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
According to a piece in the New York Times, about 1.69 million school-age students are already homeschooled in the United States. That's according to a 2016 report from the National Center for Education Statistics, which is the last year that stats were available. Let's put it in perspective, though, because we're big on this show. 1.69 million sounds like a lot of kids, right? Oh my gosh, look how many people are homeschooled. It must be substantial. Well, there's about 56 million school-aged children in the United States currently. So if we do some basic arithmetic here, we arrive at 3% approximately. 3% of all school-aged children were using homeschooling before the pandemic, okay? We do not yet have statistics on how many are opting for that as a result of the pandemic, but it was 3% prior to the pandemic. So a pretty marginal amount, right, Lance? I mean, it's not a substantial amount of school-age children use homeschooling, but how is it different from, I mean, is it just the same thing as what kids are going through right now with, that went to public school and are now at home? Is it just the same as that?
It isn't. Homeschooling has grown immensely in the last 10 to 15 years of my career. And again, it's not a huge number, but it has grown very quickly. And my reading and understanding and talking to parents who homeschool, one of the big differences is that they set up that social interaction time with other homeschool families. So like they will plan a field trip to a museum as part of their history or science lessons, and they'll interact with other children from other families, or they'll plan recesses, air quotes there, but they'll plan a day at the park or a day in somebody's front yard to play ball and run around and swing and teeter-totter. So they are homeschooling their children as far as they're not getting their lessons from the school building, but they are taking that social interaction piece and filling it. And I think that's the biggest difference between what I see happening today for a lot of students who are in virtual schools versus what homeschooling offers. So that would be, I think, the biggest difference. I mean, there's some other smaller differences, but I think that's the biggest difference, is that homeschooling takes into account that just because I'm teaching my student at home, they still need that social interaction with others. And I think that's where we see, if you read about it during this pandemic, we've seen pods develop of families. Like 3 or 4 people will say, okay, we're only going to interact with each other, and our children will interact with each other, and we will take turns educating our children. And all 4 groups of kids will go to somebody's house to learn math, or they'll go to somebody else's house to learn science. And then we'll have a picnic and play between 2 and 4 in the afternoon to give everybody a chance. And we'll do this together. So I think that's homeschooling, whereas virtual school doesn't allow for all of that social interaction. But I want to say this. I was involved last spring. I was teaching full time, and we sent the kids home. And it was very much as you stated, well, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to use Zoom or Skype, or we're all going to founder out there in technology and try to find something and hope that our kids will get on and that they have access. And I know that locally we found out that, we have about 15% of our kids who don't have quality internet access at home. So, and the district didn't know that. They assumed, that, when we make assignments for kids to do at home, that they need the internet, every student was going home and having the internet. When we went to last spring and said, okay, everybody get on the internet to get your lessons and meet with your teachers, the schools very quickly found out that about 15% of the student population did not have quality internet access to meet with their teachers. So I think, that sounds horrible, and it was, and it is, but it's also a positive that, hey, we found out something. When we were standing in our classrooms and sending kids home with work to be done on the internet, we were asking 15% of our students to do something that they didn't have access to. Now, the good thing here, though, is this year I've been working with our students virtually, and we got a different program. It's not just working with us as the teacher and us disseminating information and creating work for them to do. It is a program where they can be more self-directed, ask us for help, and we can then meet with them as needed or when they request it, which I think is good. But I know from working with others in this program, if we get the opportunity to do this again, we have some changes that we want to make, because that falls right in line with what I found in education. I went out my first year as a teacher and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And after my first year, I'm like, wow, now I know what works and what doesn't work. So I'm going to change all those things that didn't work and try something else. And I did that, and I became a better teacher. So by year 3, I pretty much had it down. Year 4, I was pretty good to go. And then it was just minor tweaks throughout the rest of my career. And I think that's where we are here. Homeschooling is something totally different. But with virtual school, we tried it last spring and we're like, whoa, not good. So now we have a program and we've made some adjustments. And I think we're doing a better job of educating our students through this virtual learning that our local school is doing. But should there be a year 3 and some of the changes that we're all clamoring for are adopted, I think we can pretty much have this down and do pretty well by our students who wanted to learn virtually and our families that want to learn virtually.
The largest difference, as you've been speaking, Lance, that's coming to mind for me, right? You're sitting at home and you're thinking, is homeschool something that I should do for my student? I think it's a question for them, but it might be an equally or bigger question for the parent or guardian, because part of what you highlighted when you were talking about here's what homeschooling is, here's what online schooling is. Online schooling driven by a teacher, right? And a program and a curriculum, and the school is managing it. Not homeschool, right? Yes, there's a curriculum, and yes, it's kind of supervised in most states. It's supervised by your school, your local school district, and reviewed quarterly. And, they're kind of tracking it, maybe have that kind of top line overview, but they're really not saying, you got to do this at this date, at this time, and you got to do this and do this. You have to meet these standards, right? But really, you as the parent have the burden of making sure your student achieves that, where I think we conventionally think of parents don't have that obligation, and maybe that's a wrong thinking. I'm just saying, I think that generally the thinking as a society is parents do not have that obligation with public K through 12 school, right? The obligation is get my student to the building, right? Either get them on the bus, have them walk, drop them off, but get them to school and they will learn and then they will come home, right? And maybe I have some interaction with homework or helping study, but the primary burden is on the school system, not on me as a parent. So I guess my thought there becomes, if you're trying to decide, I think before you talk to your student about it, you have to decide, do I have the time? Am I willing to put in the time and the energy to do those things? And the other thing that Lance made key is big difference in outcomes for student success who are homeschooled, who have a social environment versus do not. If you're planning to homeschool them and you don't really know anybody else that's homeschooling or you don't have a social plan, you should probably rethink the homeschooling thing. I guess I don't want to sound down on homeschooling. I think it's great if you have the means and the ability to execute it well. But that is difficult to do, especially if you're not a professional.
And are you willing to take on that responsibility that you said for the education of your child?
Exactly.
Now, there are many national programs to speak on behalf of homeschooling. Before everybody sends emails to us at podcast@thestateofus.org and says you guys aren't representing homeschooling. There are national programs. There are companies that exist that will sell you the curriculum and things like that. But it does put added stress on your household because the teachers aren't in charge of your students' learning. You are as the parent. So now you're wearing an extra hat that you're not wearing before. I think that's a great point that you made. But there are some programs out there and it fits. I know, I can think of one young lady who all she ever wanted to do, and now as an adult, she's doing it. She works as a therapy person using horses, and she had horses in high school. And so she went to a homeschooling program so that she could do all of her schoolwork. And then she had the entire rest of her day to work with her horses. And she's turned it into a career. So there is a niche out there that this is for. Just like go back to the first segment when you said there are, 13% of students who feel less anxiety being at home learning because school is a place of anxiety for them. So there is a niche here when we talk about educating everybody. One size does not fit all. Do most students do better with in-person learning? They do, but there is a market. There is a reason why we need to take care of those students who do not. If there are different ways to educate different groups of people, we need to do that because that will just make us stronger as a nation. It doesn't make us weaker. It will make us stronger.
The pandemic has given us a unique opportunity to learn more about these topics, things that we may never have explored otherwise. And the key in my mind to this is, yes, homeschooling requires probably by far the most parental engagement. But one of the reasons, and we don't want to leave this out, one of the reasons that a number of students are struggling with remote school, right? Not homeschooling, but remote learning, is because they don't have a solid parental structure at home. And that is, I think, a key difference between when we talk about regular in-person school versus remote learning, right? We're set aside homeschool. Even that, ideally, you're requesting more parent engagement for most students to be successful. Not nearly as much as homeschooling, right? I mean, it's not the same. It's not like the parent, it has to be involved every day and has to be involved in every class and every decision. But for most students to be successful, the burden of part of what teachers do, corralling those students, keeping them quiet in a classroom, getting them to focus, all of that dissolves for the most part because, again, teachers are remote as well. So there's just not the same level of control when you have them all grouped into a single room and you can look at them and you can say, sit still, and pay attention now and be quiet and distraction-free environment. And if you don't have a conducive home environment, whether it's busy and noisy, which may be a result of parents or guardians, or whether parents or guardians are just not involved to help keep students on task, that I think it highlights that especially low-income students, and it's not just low-income students that suffer from that, but particularly low-income backgrounds are being disproportionately affected by this because less access to the right resources like the internet and tech, but also because they may not have a conducive environment to learn in at home, or parents who have the time. They might not be bad parents, right? But they could be working full time and they're just not around when they need to be in order to help keep their student on task. Maybe they want to be, but they're not, because again, you gotta keep people fed. So I think I just want to end it with that, Lance, and making sure that people keep that in mind, that it's not just that maybe the students aren't doing anything wrong. It's just they don't have the structure component that they might have otherwise.
There you go. That's the word. That's the word I wanted to give you. In education, that's what we call it. It's structure. Everything that you talked about. And the young people need structure, whether it's in the home, whether it's in their activities, whether it's at school. The structure is the key, because that's when you have the safe feeling. And if you feel safe within the structure, then you don't have the anxiety issues to the same level. So it's that lack of structure that I think is causing a lot of that anxiety that you did a very good job of describing. But that's the word right there. Is structure encompasses everything that you were talking about.
And today we've tried to illuminate for people the importance and the differences, right, of remote learning versus homeschooling, and why students are struggling with remote learning, what we can do to make it better, and also the importance of saying we've learned a lot from the pandemic. We can apply some of these things going forward and maybe help more students. Obviously, the goal is for most students where the in-person environment is what they need. We got to get back to that. But we've also uncovered that there's a number of students that might actually do better not in that environment. So it gives us an opportunity to look at how can we incorporate that moving forward. But that's what we're all about here, Lance, right? Is having these conversations. That's what we try to do.
Exactly. Our mission here at True Chat is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we hope you've listened today and learned some things. And if we've raised some questions, you need to let us know, because we'd love to talk to you some more. And if you've enjoyed the show, or you start to share it with your friends and they say, okay, this sounds like something I might want to hear. Where do I find these guys? Where do I find these people to listen to so that I can learn from them as well and be a part of the conversation? Well, tell them they can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found. But Justin, we're not just a podcast, though, are we? Where else can they find us?
That's right. We're also a syndicated radio program. And you can listen to the radio program on the weekends. The podcast is released Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. Eastern time, but you can check your local talk markets, see if they carry The State of Us. If they don't, you can call them up and tell them they should. We'd love to hear from you. That is part of this process, and you can send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org, podcast@thestateofus.org, with your thoughts and comments. We'd very much like to know what you think of today's conversation, and if you have suggestions for us, things that we haven't yet talked about that you'd like us to. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our recording producer, Devin McCain, editing producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.